Hey YouTubers, welcome back to Desert Have a Garden. Today I want to give you a little more advanced bread recipe. So if you've been following my videos and doing the basic sourdough bread recipe using the bread machine, whether it was start to finish or if you just made the dough in the machine and then you go ahead and shape it into a loaf and bake it in the oven. If you're feeling confident with those recipes and those methods and you're starting to get a feel for the dough, this video is for you. We are still going to use the trusty Cuisinart bread machine in order to do the kneading and mixing. So it's going to do the hard work. But I'm going to introduce you to some shaping techniques in order to get those beautiful round artisan loaves that you see at all the famous bakeries. And I want you to be able to do that with things that you have around the house, so you won't need any special Banneton baskets or any different type of equipment in order to do this. I want you to be able to enjoy that artisan bread. So I'm going to go a little more quickly through the ingredients and the mixing process and how to use the machine. You can refer back to the other videos if you need help with those things. But really what I want to focus on in this video is how to do the shaping and get you going with that. So let's go ahead and get started. This recipe yields two very large artisan loaves that are approximately 2 pounds each. I like to make these big loaves and find that customers really enjoy them that size. If you don't want them that big, down in the description below, I'll provide directions for making a somewhat smaller loaf that may be a size that you prefer. So first we're adding 6 cups of flour. I like to use Morbread flour. You want to use a good strong flour, a bread flour. I add 3 teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of oil. I like to use coconut oil. Adding the oil helps the bread to retain its moisture after it has baked and sat on the counter a couple days. 2 cups of water. Next comes our starter, and you can see here that it's a nice, active, happy starter, lots of bubbles. When I fed it yesterday, I marked it with the rubber band, the level that it was filled to, so you see that it has come up in size. It's looking very good. We will use 1 cup of the starter. Now we simply put the pan into the bread machine and start the dough setting and allow it to run the dough setting. When the bread machine has completed the dough cycle, your dough will have formed into a nice ball and it's quite soft. So you just take it out of here and make sure you get the paddle out of there. And here I just kind of form it into a round ball, shaping it with my hands. This isn't super important, but you just want it to be in a nice round ball. Next, you're going to place it into a bowl for the first rising period. It doesn't really rise, I should say resting period. I use pure water in a squirt bottle to mist this. You don't grease it, you just mist it with water. And put our dough inside. And then mist it again so a crust does not form on top of the dough. And cover it tightly with plastic wrap and allow it to rest for about an hour, and then we'll come back and shape it again. After allowing the dough to rest for an hour, I take off the plastic wrap and I will turn it out onto the counter by using a scraper. I think this scraper came in a kit for cake making and icing decorating or something. So the top of the dough is now face down on the counter. And I like to wait an hour of resting because it's easier to work with. You can do this anywhere between a half hour and you can even do it up to 2 to 3 hours later. But I like to get my dough in its final shape for its long ferment. So taking this dough, you grab one side and you pull it and fold it over. And we grab another side, and we grab another side, and another side. And you're just grabbing pieces of dough and pulling them over. And what this does is it creates tension on the top of the dough, which is on the counter right now. It's on the underside. Then we'll take some smaller pieces using these edges where you see it's down. And then you've got it all kind of wrapped up into this package. Next, we'll flip it over, and I use the scraper to kind of detach it from the counter. We flip it over, and using both my hands, the heels of my hands, I press underneath. And my hands are coming together, pressing the dough, kind of building pressure in this dome, making tension for this nice round dome. And so you just go around and around until you have a nice round ball here. And you will respray your bucket with water again. We don't want a hard crust to be forming on the dough at this time. And so we pick it up and putting the top side up and the bottom side down into our bucket. Give it a mist on the top. Again, not wanting a crust to form. And recover with our plastic. Here I will wait another hour and I will do the final shaping of the dough. Now that we have allowed the bread to rest for another hour, we're ready to do the final shaping of the dough. Now you'll look at this dough and see that it has not risen substantially. Here it is steamy in here and it looks nice, but sourdough is a much slower process. If it were a yeasted bread, you would have expected it to have already doubled in this amount of time, but the sourdough will not do that. Typically, people like to use Banneton baskets, which is these type of baskets that have the swirl pattern, and it leaves that pretty flowered swirl pattern on the top of the bread. They can be a little bit pricey, and I don't expect everyone to have them, so I have an alternative for you. Walmart has colanders, these cheap plastic colanders for 88 cents each. Now, you probably have at least one colander in your home because you drain pasta or whatever else with it. This is what we are going to use. You just need a basket that has holes in it so that you get airflow. You don't want it to be an enclosed and a sealed structure. So I have 2 of these colanders that we will use, and we will simply use a tea towel inside of them. And again, this is something you can get at Walmart. I think they have a 7-pack for $10 or something. It's extremely affordable. So I lay these across the baskets here and use my hand to press them in. So you just simply have the towel inside the basket. And next you'll have your little pot of flour, and sprinkle the flour generously in here because you don't want the dough to stick to the towel. You want it to release easily. So you kind of just sprinkle and flick so that it covers the towel inside the basket. And I'll set these back a little bit. Now we are ready to shape the dough. Again, we want to maintain the top of the dough onto the counter surface. You may do just a tiniest bit, sprinkle of flour there to keep it from sticking. And we will turn it out onto the counter using our scraper. And again, this is very different than yeasted dough. You would expect yeasted dough to stick all in here if it had just been misted with water. Typically with yeasted dough, you have to oil it. So now we have our dough on the counter. If you care about the dough being divided equally, you can use a scale in order to weigh the dough and then split it in half. And so I'll use that today. And we have 63 ounces, so half of that is 31.5 ounces. Really, if you're not worried about customers or anything else, you can just simply split it in half for yourself. And again, that's 31 ounces is real close to 2 pounds. And I got it spot on that first time there. So we're going to set this guy over to the side and go ahead and start shaping our dough. Let me make sure I get into the camera here. So I kind of press it out a little bit with my fingers. It doesn't deflate like yeasted bread. And again, we're going to do the same method where we pull up corners and shape and shape and shape around. And just some smaller pieces here. And just getting pieces to come around and then kind of pinch them together. And now we're going to turn it over And using my hands, again, the heels of my hands are pressing together in this motion here, where I'm tucking the bottom under. So I'm tucking the bottom under and kind of pinching it together, creating a round dome here. And then once you have a nice round dome, that one is all ready to go. It will go upside down into the basket. So the top of the bread goes down into the basket. And so this one will just, you don't want it to stick to the counter. So I usually shape like this and then immediately pick it up and face down into the basket. And then here comes our second loaf. Again, pressing down a little bit with your fingers, spread it out, and then pinching and pulling pieces in to the middle. It's actually a very dry day here today. Usually this is a little bit stickier, which is better, but this is still working just fine. So if your dough is wetter than this, that's okay too. I just kind of pinch in the pieces there to seal them off, gently roll it over, and here we go again, tucking it under using the heels of your hands. Round and round we go, making a nice tight round dome on the surface there. If you see any big bubbles, you can pinch those to release them. I don't see any big bubbles on here, so I don't need to do that. And then lift it, and you'll see the bottom kind of has the ugly side there, but face down goes into the basket. Pull this closer for you to see. Now we have them both in their baskets. Simply pull the cloth over top and allow it to rest. Here's a discussion on timing. I like to allow my artisan bread to be started in the afternoon, and then I shape it in the evening, and it will rest all night long and rise all night long, and then I bake in the morning. And that's because I like to allow at least 12 hours from start to finish for my bread. Once I start kneading, 12 hours. It's usually more like 16 to 18 hours. So that's how you'll plan your day and figure out how you're going to use your time in order to make this artisan sourdough. So I will check back with you in the morning. It is the next morning and the bread has had the chance to rest overnight, and it won't have risen very much. And this is because it is sourdough. So you might think that you've already experienced failure, but that's not true. With sourdough, most of our excitement comes in the oven with what is called oven spring. And oven spring is where all of a sudden the bread just puffs up and looks beautiful. So there's two things that we need for that to happen. And the first is high heat temperature. And for me, I find that 425 degrees works best for me. 450 works for some people, but I find that it actually burns the bread before it is able to cook it all the way through. So I stick with 425 degrees for the oven temperature. And the second thing is steam. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a steam injected oven. And so I have to improvise a little bit. And so what I use is an old pan. So it looks kind of cruddy and gross, but that's because we have hard water here. And I simply place this shallow pan on the bottom rack in the oven, and when I put the bread in, after I place the bread in, I pour a couple of cups of water into this pan and quickly close the oven door. This creates enough steam for the baking process in order to keep the crust soft and allow it to continue rising. Once the crust gets too hard, it won't puff up anymore. So we need that steam. So this is definitely an essential part. What I'm going to do is get the oven started and get this in there. Another thing that I like to put in is just a pizza stone. So I use a big pizza stone and I put that on the rack where the bread is going to go. I find that it helps keep the bottom of the bread from getting too dark, and you don't want the bottom of the bread to burn. So having a pizza stone that's preheated with the oven will help keep the temperature more even. And I do use a cookie sheet to put the bread on, but you can put it directly on the pizza stone if you want to be sliding it in and out. I find I'm more prone to burns if I do it that way. So let's get the oven heated up. Now the oven is preheated, and so not only did I allow it to reach temperature, I allowed it to go beyond that about 10 minutes to make sure it's completely heated up and that pizza stone is really hot, as well as the extra pan. Now you see our loaves here did not substantially rise, but they have a nice round shape. They do have a nice crust on the outside, so they're not moist at all, which is good. This leads to our artisan crust. And now we're going to turn them out onto a parchment lined cookie sheet. So remember, this is the bottom of the loaf facing up. So what I do is place my hand to give it support and tip it over, catching it. And here I just set it down on the tray. So this is the top that was inside the basket. And the same thing with the second loaf. And there are our 2 loaves. Now, sourdough will split, and it will split at the weakest point. In order to have it split in a more decorative way, we often will score it, and you can use a sharp knife or a lame. And this is a lame, which is simply a tool that has a sharp razor blade on it. And using this, you can make a decorative slice on it in order to give that the area to release the steam. Oftentimes a simple design is simply an X, so you just run it across and there's your X. This one I'll do a little bit more fancy with kind of a box shape. So 2 lines that are parallel to each other and then perpendicular. And now we are ready to place them into our heated oven. I like to do this as quickly as possible, so I open the oven, slide in the bread, having my water ready. I pour in my 2 cups of water, careful for the steam, and quickly close it up. Now I will bake for 30 to 35 minutes. My oven just beeped, indicating 30 minutes have passed, and the bread looks nice. You can go for a darker crust if you'd like to. I find that most of my customers don't like the crust too dark because they are still Americans. So I like to test for doneness using my internal temperature thermometer, and I like to make sure that it gets to at least 188 degrees. And this one is well past that. So I'm going to take these out and set them to cool. I have allowed the bread to cool a bit, and you can see here how much it puffed up. So this is what I mean by oven spring, and you see how it splits the bread and pushes up, and so it gives it this nice pattern. And there's a golden crust, and you can hear it's crisp on the outside, which is the way sourdough is supposed to be. Some people like it, the true artisan people really like a nice deep golden brown crust, but like I said, most of my customers prefer it about this degree because they don't like the crust too thick and crunchy. That's just kind of like an American thing. So let's go ahead and cut into it so you can see the center, and I'll show you the bottom too. So there's the bottom. Let's go ahead and slide these over. And using a sharp bread knife, okay, and here is the inside of our sourdough. And so it has a nice moist interior and a crispy crust. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and give me a thumbs up if it proves to be helpful in improving your sourdough game.